Hello, welcome to part 2 on the Star of Bethlehem. And we're talking about the three wise men coming from the east. And notice this. The wise men are coming from the east. And they're looking for a star rising in the east. This means that the star that they're looking for is behind them. Right? It's behind them. They're going from east to west. And they're looking for this star that in Israel will be rising in the east. So this emphasizes that it's not that the wise men saw this star, oh, look at that pretty star in the sky, and they kept walking to it until it was over their heads. Of course, by the time they got to it, the star would be moving. So the point when it's over your head, and most stars never get over your head. I mean, all of that is not very sophisticated understanding of how the sky works, because what's over your head changes, is moving all the time. Anyway, my point is this: they're real astrologers, and what they're looking for is that from the viewpoint of how the sky looks in Israel, and the sky looks different at all places, something is going to be rising, which is behind them. They're walking from east to west, or they're on, horses or whatever, however they're traveling, I don't know. But they're going from east to west to get to a point where something is going to look astrologically very important behind them in the east. And what is that something that's going to be very important rising in the east? The new moon. The new moon, the moment the new moon occurs, it's on the ascendant in Israel. If you're somewhere else, it's not on the ascendant. And simultaneously, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that every 20 years indicates a change in the kings is rising and coming to the midheaven, also and exact within 6 hours. Okay, so this is what's the fundamental thing going on. And as we will see, Regulus will also be involved. That's essential for anything related to kings. I'll get to the details of how Regulus gets involved, probably in this part too. Okay, so when the wise men arrive in Israel, they ask where the newborn king of the Jews is. It appears that they picked the general area of birth, but not the exact specific location. Think about what they said. They said the king of the Jews is born here. Where is he? Where is he? They don't know the exact place or moment. They know it's right around there. If we just take the Bible literally and assume that what it is telling us is reasonably accurate, that they arrived and they said, okay, he's born here. We know it. We have no doubt about it. But if they knew the exact moment, the exact place, they could tell the king, well, he was born in Bethlehem, 30 kilometers west of us at this moment. They didn't know that precisely. They knew he was there. They knew it had happened. They knew that the new moon was rising there, that the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction once in a millennium. And as we'll see, that Regulus is involved. They knew the king was born. But exactly where and when, they didn't know, but they knew he was there. It makes perfect sense. All of the details of the story are very reasonable. They all make sense. This is how astrology works, given the limitations of their calculations. If we assume that they were expert astrologers, and that fits in with the story as well. Okay, so of course the two lights, the sun and moon, are very important. And note that the moon is the only object that moves a great distance in one day. Moves 13 to 14 degrees on average per day. And throughout the Middle Ages, for example, when people would ask a question, what we call horary astrology, they'd say, where are my lost jewelry, or whatever you want to know. You track the moon. Excuse me. The moon is the indicator of how things will develop, because it's it's like what we call Mercury the messenger, but in horary, in questions, and in the developmental cycles of things, the moon is the speedy one that's touching different points and leaving one thing and reaching another. So it shows the developmental process. Okay, so the east is the point of rising, of birth, of ascendancy. The new moon is conjunct the ascendant. The symbolism is perfect. New moon on the ascendant. I mean, wham! I mean, that's just like perfect for the birth, for the new millennium. And they come to that point where the new moon will be rising, and Jupiter Saturn is coming towards the midheaven. Now we can look at an astromap and see exactly where the new moon is on the ascendant. Let's do that. Here is, let's see, new moon 7 BC. I have an astromap here. Yeah, this is it. This is the, let me change a setting here to what we call to the zodiac longitude. Okay, here it is. Now, the astrologers around the year 0 or 7 BC did not have computers with astromaps, but we do today. And what this shows us is here's the sun and the moon with a conjunction symbol. Sun and moon, this is the time of the new moon. At that time, what is it? 2 hours, 38 minutes, 39 seconds, universal time. Here's Jerusalem. If you were a little bit west of Jerusalem, the new moon would be exactly on the ascendant. At the instant the new moon occurred, it would be exactly on the ascendant if you're on this line. And we can go here to quick map for distance. And I'll click on Jerusalem because Bethlehem is just on this west side of Jerusalem. And then I click here around the closest point on the yellow line. And it tells me up here in this caption area that it is, let's see, diameter 31 miles, the 35 miles. So it's about 35 miles would be the exact point. So now, maybe Jesus was born up here near Nazareth, and it would be even farther. So we don't know if he was born near Nazareth or if he was born near Jerusalem. We also don't know, it says Bethlehem, we don't know, maybe that extended very far west. But also we don't know the accuracy of the calculations, and the astrologers didn't seem to insist that it would be exactly on the line. But using modern calculations, this shows us exactly where the line would be. This would be the special spot along this line where the new moon is right on the ascendant. Now, I'm not going to get into this now. I want to cover some other things. This will probably be in part 3 or part 4, or however many parts I need for this. I'm going to go into technical details about what we consider to be sunrise, and there's a lot of variations of how you can look at this. There's something called inmundo, there's refraction of light, and so just for technical purposes about where this new moon was rising, all of them indicate the basic area of Israel, no matter how you look at it. But I will get into those details at the end in another section for those of you who want to get into those fine points about how the astrologers at that time might have looked at where the critical area is for that new moon to be rising. Okay, but in longitude, the way we do it in modern times, which I believe is essentially the same as the way they did in ancient times, it's coming right in through Israel to the accuracy of their calculations at that time, right through the middle of Israel. And they did not seem to be insisting that the birth would have to be precisely on the line anyway. Okay. So just showing you different ways of looking at this and understanding what's going on. Okay, back to our PowerPoint. And Jupiter and Saturn, by the way, we see Jupiter and Saturn in a modern style chart wheel. We put east on the left, and up near the top is the midheaven. There's Jupiter and Saturn going up towards the midheaven. Okay. Now, also interesting is that there is a tradition that enlightened beings are born at either new moon or full moon. So, for example, here's a quote. The Buddha to be was born in about the year 563 BCE in the kingdom of Sakyas, present-day southern Nepal, on the full moon day of the month of Vishaka. So, Buddha was born on the full moon. This is well established. Buddhists around the world celebrate the birth of Buddha on a full moon. Also, that's close to 600 years before the birth of Jesus. If we go much later to the year 1486, here's another quote from a Wikipedia article. According to the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Charitamrita, Chaitanya was born in Nabidwip in present-day West Bengal on the full moon night of 18 February 1486 at the time of a lunar eclipse. So again, a full moon. Now, in the case of the birth of Jesus, new moon would make more sense according to ancient astrology as well as modern astrology, because full moon is a time of fulfillment. New moon is a time of new beginnings. And the emphasis with the birth of Jesus is a new beginning, new, birth. So in the case of Jesus, new moon is important. What I'm pointing out here is the importance of the lunar cycle, new moons and full moons, in relationship to special people, enlightened people, world leaders. And also notice Buddha born over 500 years earlier, and the tradition is back then and it continues. I'm just emphasizing that this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction coinciding with the new moon is really a big deal and makes sense so many ways. Now, this gets interesting. I said earlier that I expected the donkey stars, Acellus Borealis and Acellus Australis, and Praesepe, the major star, would be involved only because they play such a big part in the story as it got handed down. That must have been picked up from those stars. The stars must have been involved and got woven into the story. Even if they weren't there conspicuously from the beginning, they got woven into the story. They must have been important. And Regulus would have to be involved. It's the king of the sky. How do they get involved? Now, this is interesting. It took a new insight into looking at this chart. And here's how I got the insight. The new moon is critical, is what I'm assuming. It's marking this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction as 1 in 1,000 years. It's a millennial event. Here's the birth of the king for at least a millennium. We're talking about cycles. We're talking about a new era. As that new moon unfolds, it's a little bit like what you see in a church, like a Catholic church, of stations of the cross, like stopping points in a journey. That the moon, as it leaves the sun, is going to be the unfolding of the story. Remember, these are expert astrologers. And remember that the astrology at that time was mixing the idea of the birth chart with the mundane astrology of the unfolding of events. In fact, it's not so much the birth chart that's of interest here. It's that moment, that sign from the heavens. And how does that story unfold, that moment of the new moon rising in Israel, Jupiter and Saturn approaching the top of the sky, approaching the midheaven, the king. All of this essential to the Christmas story. all the Christmas carols and everything we sing today, reflecting on this. What happens is, as the moon leaves the sun in its 29-day journey, when it touches the great benefics, when the moon leaves the sun and touches Venus, in other words, when it's conjunct Venus, that's going to be a marking point. That's going to be a critical point in the unfolding of this story. And when the moon leaves and touches Jupiter, in other words, conjunct Jupiter, those two moments in time will tell us how the Christmas story, or well, they weren't calling it a Christmas story then, how the story of the new Messiah unfolds and what some of the key ingredients are. And when 29 and a third days later, when the moon comes back to the sun, will be kind of the end of the story. That lunar cycle, the signs in the heavens of what is to come. Remember the movement of the moon, how important it is later in medieval horary, how important it is all the way back to the arguably the earliest astrology in India of the nakshatras. The movement of the moon. And what we will find, is that as the moon moves and it makes these contacts, it brings out key features of the story. So to fully understand why this is the Star of Bethlehem, it's not only that it's a once in 1,000-year event, the way it unfolds describes the story. We can call the Christmas story. So let's look at what happens when the moon reaches the bright star Venus in a fixed stars wheel. So what we will do is we are looking at the new moon. This is it. The new moon, sun and moon, 4 degrees Gemini, conjunct the ascendant, 4 degrees Gemini, Jupiter and Saturn conjunct within 1 minute. About 6 hours later, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is exact. So it's getting close to being, it's going to be exact that day, which if their calculations are as accurate as I think they are, they knew that Jupiter-Saturn becomes perfect that day after the morning. And that's the idea of the coming over your head. By the time Jupiter and Saturn reach the midheaven, halfway up to their highest point, it's now becoming day. They faded out and they have stopped in terms of being visible as they come overhead. I think that's the stopping. It's not that the Earth stopped spinning on its axis. It would only be a nova or a comet or the Earth stopping on its axis that could have stopped over their head. Maybe there was also a nova or a comet or something that would do that. Actually, I guess it would only be a comet if it was moving in the right direction. All that would be rather extraordinary and very speculative. But the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction fading out and disappearing as it comes overhead is the emphasis on the new king being born as the Jupiter-Saturn reaches its highest point and disappears under the light of the new day. Okay, now I want to show you this fixed stars wheel. I'm going to click over here. This is what we call a fixed stars wheel in the Series 3.0 software. It's the same chart. There's the sun and moon at 4 Gemini, ascendant 4 Gemini, but with fixed stars around the outside. And I've put into this wheel at, let's see, if I go to Cancer, here they are. PRA in this, in this index or legend, whatever you want to call it, I have PRA is Precipice, and ASB is Acellus Borealis, and ASA is Acellus Australis. The two donkeys, northern and southern donkey, and the manger, from 9 Cancer 29 to 10 Cancer 49, 1 degree 20 minutes. They're all within 1 degree 20 minutes. Now, watch this. I go to the time adjust. And over here I select Moon. And here I select Venus. and I have an angle of 0 degrees, and I click on Find Time of Aspect. So here we are at about 2:39 a.m. Universal Time, May 27th. The moon at 4 Gemini is going to reach Venus at 5 Cancer in about 2.5 days. So in the evening of May 29th, I believe, if I'm thinking about this correctly, the moon will reach Venus. And think of it, again, like Stations of the Cross or a journey, like a stopping point. Moon is going to move forward. It's exactly the idea that becomes very strong throughout the Middle Ages in doing horary and medical analysis and other things. We watch that moon. Remember, it's the new moon that is very important here, as well as the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. When moon reaches Venus, it's like a blessing. What will the blessing be? All I have to do is click on this right arrow, click on Find Time of Aspect. I click on it, and it tells me up here, May 29th at 9, rounding off to the nearest minute, 9:54 p.m. I was right, 2.5 days later. The moon is conjunct Venus at 9 Cancer 48. 9 Cancer 48 is 9 Cancer, where am I? 9 Cancer 48 is a little bit after Precipe and Acellus Borealis and before Acellus Australis. It's right in the middle of that 1 degree 20-minute area. It's a Moon-Venus conjunction in Cancer. If you're an astrologer, you're going, wow, because you know what I'm talking about. If you're not an astrologer, the moon rules Cancer. And Venus in Cancer, beautiful. The moon, Venus, and this, of course, the maternal aspect at the manger with the donkeys. There's the unfolding. And I am suggesting that this is why this becomes part of the Christmas story, of the story of the birth of Jesus. And maybe it was literally true as well. But at least astrologically, symbolically, that's how the manger gets involved, born in a manger, because this is part of that moment. You know, you can look at it like this, that it's like a mystical vision, that the whole story, the whole unfolding is also contained in that moment. Just like the whole oak tree is in this acorn. It's all there. It's like it's all compressed into that little acorn. It's in that seed. And this is part of the imagery also used in the New Testament. You know, seeds, potentials. The level of sophistication of the astrology, of understanding of life, of symbolic thinking, of even a kind of fractal thinking, is very deep, very profound, is what I'm suggesting. And so there is that locked in that seed that the moon is going to come to Venus at the manger. It's so beautiful, so maternal, so sweet. Moon, Venus at the manger with the donkeys. You know, this idea that they're, cattle and sheep or whatever, and all these animals are around. So there it is. There it is. And in my notes, I think I give the exact details. Yeah. So moon is conjunct Venus, 9 Cancer 48, conjunct Precipe with a 19-minute orb. These are really small orbs. Conjunct Acellus Borealis, that's the northern donkey, with a 6-minute orb, because Acellus Borealis is the one in the middle, and Venus is right in the middle of these three stars. 6-minute orb, conjunct Acellus Australis, with a 1 degree 1-minute orb. So conjunct the two donkeys and the manger, divinely beautiful maternal energy. It is descriptive of the manger scene that we still celebrate today, 2,000 years later. It would be an extraordinary coincidence if this had not worked into the story of the birth of Jesus. So it got worked into the story. Now, if it's true that these three wise men were using this technique of seeing how the moon unfolds within that cycle, and again, I'm not on a wild goose chase here. If you know about how astrology worked in the Middle Ages, how it worked with nakshatras and Jyotish, etc., the importance of the moon, the importance of that we're talking about cycles, that these are highly sophisticated people, highly educated. They know what they're looking at cycles. This is not some fishing expedition. And if I'm right, that this is what's important, what happens when the moon goes all the way around and catches up with Jupiter? That's going to be what, over a week later? It's already coming back to the sun. That would be important because Jupiter's the king. When the moon reaches the king, that would have to be important. Remember, these astrologers use very detailed analysis. They're looking at an intricate system. This is not some little dumbed down thing like, oh, I saw a bright star in the sky, my Savior's coming. No. These are the wise men. These are the great people of the time. And remember, in those days, the diviners of the sky, they're not just like what we think of as nerds, like, oh, they've got big brains, therefore they must have small hearts, and there's a right brain versus a left brain. They're not thinking that way. They're thinking of knowledge as a gift. It's enlightened. It's like light. Anyway, it's a beautiful thing. What's going on with the wisdom that these three wise men have. Let's see what happens. Let's go to Jupiter. All I have to do, select Moon, Jupiter, find time of aspect. And over here it says next. I'm not going to previous, I'm going next. Let's see what happens. This should be, around June 8 or 9, I guess. I'm not sure. Find time of aspect. Oh, it's all the way 17. Oh, yeah, that's right. It takes, what am I thinking? It takes 14 days to go halfway. Right. So that's right. It's over halfway around June 17. And what's happening? There's the moon conjunct Jupiter at 23 Pisces 21. Okay, nothing exciting there, but look at the midheaven. At the midheaven is Venus. The midheaven is 0 Leo 04, Venus 1 Leo 45, just inside what we would call the 10th house with Regulus. Venus is conjunct Regulus with a 21-minute orb. The other great benefic. And also Venus is far from the sun, so it's standing out there. Once the sun sets, this Venus on Regulus will be highly visible, and I think that's probably important. So later on, the sun sets on this day, and Venus is on Regulus. You have a triple conjunction. Venus, midheaven, Regulus. I even suspect that to the accuracy of their calculations, they might have had the midheaven closer to 1 Leo. It's probably right exactly on it to their calculation. It's darn close as it is. So when the moon reaches the king, Jupiter, who's the kingly planet, what is at the top of the sky? Remember, the emphasis in the Bible of the top of the sky is the reaching the pinnacle, reaching your highest point. The king is the highest point. Who is at the highest point? When the moon reaches the king, Regulus, the king of the stars, is at the midheaven with Venus in Leo, the kingly sign. Wow. So here is Regulus ruling, looking down on the whole chart with Venus when the moon has its meeting with the king of the planets. When the moon meets the king of the planets, Jupiter, the king of the stars, Regulus is at the midheaven. So the other stars that we expect to be important, the Praesepe and Acellus Borealis and Acellus Australis and Regulus, become highlighted as the moon moves around and makes contact with the two great benefics. And the last thing I'm going to do is let's see when the moon reaches the sun at the end of the cycle. So now we've got the moon over here at 23 Pisces. It's happening at the quarter moon. About 7 days later, the moon will return back to the sun, and that will be the end of the story. How does the story end? Which is maybe not so critically important. It's like the end of it, but just for curiosity, let's take a look at it. That should be around the 24th of June. I'll find time of next aspect. Sure enough, there it is, June 25th. Moon has returned to the sun, and this is really almost shocking that Saturn, when this new moon happens, is right on the 4th house cusp. It's within 9 minutes using modern calculations. Saturn on the 4th house cusp with Jupiter nearby, almost 2 degrees away. Jupiter's now moved 2 degrees away from Saturn a month later. At the time of the new moon, they were exactly conjunct. Now Jupiter has left Saturn. So Saturn exactly on the IC at the bottom, when the cycle is over, indicates that when this is over, it's over. There's a sad, a deep, a profound death. And so, of course, you have the crucifixion of Christ, rising 3 days later, which is interesting because Jupiter is nearby 2 degrees away from this, maybe showing hope afterwards. But there's your tragic ending to the story. So that's just kind of interesting. What I think is more important is that the manger, Praesepe, and the king, Regulus, are brought into the unfolding of the story. And I think we have now hit upon one of the techniques used by the astrologers. So as the astronomer, John Moseley, guessed that the key is in the interpretation, we had to think like an astrologer around the year 0, a very sophisticated astrologer, and what would they be looking at? And we have found it. So that's how all of that works together. And that I'm going to make a third part to this series of videos on technical details. So for those of you who are interested in technical details, like some of you may be thinking, oh, I don't think the ancients would have done the new moon in zodiac longitude. They would have done it in Mundo. They would have looked at refraction of light. If you're into all those technical details, I will address that in a third video and basically show that the results are essentially the same. They line up more precisely in zodiac longitude, but the results are basically the same, no matter how the astrologers were thinking. And so for subtle details, like the academic astrological details, I'll cover that in a separate video. But I believe we have now, this just repeats what I've said, and how all, what I was going to say is I believe I've accomplished in these 2 videos what I want to do, which is to show you what I think is very convincing evidence that the Star of Bethlehem is May 27, 7 BC. And all the details, King of Kings, hallelujah. I mean, all the things that the compositions, the Christmas carols, etc., how they reflect precisely this astrological story is amazing. So here I start getting into some of the technical details about Jerusalem versus Nazareth and the cycles. And well, let me just, I'll bring us to this summary and then we'll do part 3. That Jerusalem and Nazareth have nearly the same longitude. Nazareth is due north of Jerusalem. Remember, we don't know if Jesus was born near Jerusalem or near Nazareth. And I did it both ways. I did the calculations both ways. I did the new moon for Nazareth and for Jerusalem, and it made almost no difference. Midheaven with the Venus Regulus is the same. Really made no difference at all. And here's where I talk about the Saturn at the 4th house. And last thing I want to mention, then I'll summarize, and we'll be done with this second part of this series, is that the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is in Pisces. And this is the beginning of the Pisces age. You know, on December 21st, 2020, Jupiter-Saturn conjunction was in Aquarius, and people are looking at it as a heralding of the Aquarian age. This one is in Pisces. And I believe that these 3 wise men knew about the changing of the ages. The understanding of precession of the equinoxes was understood at the time, in the time of Hipparchus, if not earlier, who documented the idea of the precession of the equinoxes. I think they knew about the ages, and they knew this was being a Pisces age, and it would be another reason to expect a new king to herald in the new age. So that's just another interesting little detail about how this connects with the ages. Maybe some of you are historians, or maybe future research will confirm whether the astrologers at that time would know about the ages. We do know that Vettius Valens was a sidereal astrologer, and Ptolemy was a tropical astrologer. So around the year 150 to 200, you have the same choices we have today. Are you going to be tropical or sidereal? They knew both zodiacs. Valens places the vernal equinox in the sidereal zodiac, and since at least the time of Hipparchus, if not earlier, they knew about precession of the equinoxes. So the idea of the ages was probably understood then, and probably another thing that works into it, and probably another reason why a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Pisces was seen as a message of the new age, marking that Piscean emphasis. So I just thought I'd mention that as well. We don't need that Jupiter, Saturn, and Pisces theme and the idea of ages to establish that this is the Star of Bethlehem. I think it's established by the fact that it's 1 in 1,000 years, that the new moon coincides with it, and that the new moon and the unfolding of the moon reflects perfectly the story that unfolds about the birth of Jesus and his life. So to summarize, Jupiter conjunct Saturn and new moon rising in Israel, that's the fundamental thing. Almost like Stations of the Cross, the moon moves forward and reaches Venus at the manger and the 2 donkeys. The moon reaches Jupiter with Regulus and Venus at the midheaven. Those are the fundamental things that I think are behind what the 3 wise men were seeing, and why they saw this as the birth of the King of the Jews, the Messiah, whatever terms you want to use for it, and that the new moon is rising in Israel. That's why Israel was the place. And remember, east was behind them. So they weren't just looking up at a star in the sky. They picked that point to have the new moon rising, Jupiter and Saturn coming to the midheaven, Jupiter and Saturn fading out as the day began at the top of the chart. So, so there we have the Christmas story. What I'm going to do in part 3, I'm going to give you a little twist to the Christmas story, and I'll give you a preview to it, is that maybe Jesus was actually not born on May 27, 7 BC. That is the Star of Bethlehem. We've always assumed that Jesus was born with the Star of Bethlehem. But when you read the Bible and it says, he was already born, it's we'll talk about that, the little twist, and I'll get into the technical details. I don't know if that'll take one or two more videos, but we'll cover that. For those of you who just want to know the basic facts of what the Star of Bethlehem is, you're done. You don't need to watch the next two videos if you're curious about these additional details, just to fill out the all of the information related to this. You can watch the two additional videos, but that's it, my friends. I don't think there's any other date for the Star of Bethlehem that fits seamlessly with what we understand in a very, you might say, transparent, simple, common sense way, and suggesting, by the way, that the stories in the Bible are accurate, that this is what happened. I mean, they've gotten adorned and dressed up like any stories is, but it what's described astrologically, what we understand about the times, it all fits together very nicely. Okay, my friends, thank you very much for listening. God bless. Namaste.